Council President, committee members, and participants, we are now live.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. We will start our process and our FY24 budget hearings. But before we begin the public hearing, I'd like to make the following announcement. Due to the continuing threat to public health from COVID-19, City Council committees are currently meeting remotely. We are using Microsoft Teams to make these remote hearings possible. Instructions for how the public may view and offer public testimony at public hearings of council committees are included in the public hearing notices that are published in the Daily News, the Inquirer, and the Legal Intelligencer prior to the hearing, and can also be found on phlcouncil.com. I now note that the hour has come. Mr. McDermott, please call the roll. Members that are in attendance, please indicate that you are present.
Councilmember Bass. Councilmember Brooks.
Good morning. This is Councilwoman Bass. I am present.
Morning,
Good morning.
Councilwoman.
Thank you. Good morning.
Councilmember Brooks.
Good morning. I'm present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Driscoll. Councilmember Gautier. Councilmember Gilmore Richardson.
Good morning, Council President. Good morning, colleagues. I am present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Harity.
Good morning, everyone. I am present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Johnson. Councilmember Jones.
Good morning, Mr. President. Colleagues, I am present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Lozada.
Councilmember Lozada is present.
Good
morning,
morning.
everyone.
Councilmember O'Neill. Councilmember Phillips.
Good morning, everyone. And Councilmember Phillips is present. Happy morning, Philadelphia.
Good morning.
Councilmember Squilla.
Good morning, Council President, colleagues, present.
Good morning.
Councilmember Thomas.
Good morning, Council President. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning to the listening public. I'm present.
Good morning.
And Councilmember Vaughn.
Good morning, everyone. I am present.
Good morning. We've established a quorum of the committee, and this hearing is now called to order. This is the continued public hearing of the Committee of the Whole regarding bills number 230144, 230145, 230146, 230147, 230148, 230149, and resolution number 230162. Mr. McDermott, please read the titles of the bills and resolution.
Bill number 230144, an ordinance to adopt a capital program for the 6 fiscal years 2024 to 2029 inclusive. Bill number 230145, an ordinance to adopt a fiscal 2024 capital budget. Bill number 230146, an ordinance adopting the operating budget for fiscal year 2024. Bill number 230147, an ordinance amending chapter 19-1500 of the Philadelphia Code entitled
We lost you, Bob.
Mr. McDermott, you cut out. Dropped.
I'm joining from my phone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now, yes.
Okay. Bill number 230148, an ordinance amending chapter 19-2800 of the Philadelphia Code in Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority tax on wages and net profits, provide for the continuation of the tax and to make other conforming changes, all under certain terms and conditions. Bill number 230149, an ordinance amending chapter 19-2600 of the Philadelphia Code entitled Business Income and Receipts Taxes by revising certain tax rates under certain terms and conditions. And resolution number 230162, providing for the approval by the Council of the City of Philadelphia, a revised 5-year financial plan for the City of Philadelphia, covering fiscal years 2024 through 2028 and incorporating revised changes with respects to fiscal 2023, which is to be submitted by the mayor to the Pennsylvania Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority pursuant to the Intergovernmental Cooperation Agreement authorized by an ordinance of this council, approved by the mayor on January 3rd, 1992, by and between the city and the authority.
Thank you, sir. Today, we continue the public hearing of the committee whole to consider the bills read by the clerk that constitute proposed operating and capital spending measures for fiscal 2024, a capital program, and a forward-looking capital plan for fiscal 2024 through fiscal 2029. This morning, we will hear testimony from the Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity, the Office of Homeless Services, and OIT. This afternoon, we will hold public testimony on the budget. As of this point, I think we have approximately 40 people that have indicated an interest in testifying. Mr. McDermott, the first person to testify this morning is?
Our first witness is the Executive Director and CEO, the Executive Director of CEO, Mitch Little.
Thank you. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Council President.
How are you? You can please proceed with your testimony when you're ready.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Sorry, I am out of town and having a little bit of technical difficulty. Please bear with me. Good morning, Council President Clark and members of City Council. Mitchell Little, Executive Director of CEO, and I'm pleased to provide testimony on behalf of the Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity for fiscal year 2024 operating budget. The Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity supports the economic growth of Philadelphia by providing leadership on issues of economic justice and advancing racial equity and inclusive growth so that all Philadelphians can share in the city's future. CEO carries out his mission by funding and piloting new programs, engaging in advocacy, supporting policy, research, and analysis, convening local and national stakeholders. The work of CEO is guided by a strategic framework. Plans for fiscal year 2014 is to increase public engagement efforts, expand trauma-informed community engagement, and develop equitable community engagement tools to increase access to basic needs in most vulnerable communities, connect families and individuals to resources, and serve as a connector between communities and city government. Through the integration of Philly Counts and other citywide programs, MOSEV CEO will expand the city's approach to trauma-informed community engagement by collecting critical outreach programs that successfully engage the most marginalized community. This work includes CEO existing benefit access work, as well as new programs such as election, vaccine, water access, and other basic needs and benefits available to support those in needs. By the integration of this work into existing city departments, we will be able to multiply the impact and, more importantly, connect communities a broader scope of resources. A large debt collection representation program. The debt collection representation program will support the work of the newly launched Consumer Protection, Financial Protection Task Force. It's modeled after the Philadelphia's eviction prevention program. And this program will directly impact Black and Brown communities to whom we have seen repeatedly be victimized by racially driven, targeted wealth stripping in the most vulnerable of communities. And complete our GROW pilot. CEO will conduct a GROW study that aligns with similar studies around guaranteed basic income, working with eTANF participants. CEO believes the study is significant given the limited research that currently exists on TANF populations, notwithstanding eTANF. While TANF enrollments have decreased nationally, poverty has increased or remained the same in many areas across the country, and Philadelphia remains #1 city among the top 10 largest cities by the population of the highest deep poverty rate. Therefore, Philly Works and the Work Ready program will do a research study providing guaranteed basic income for 50 participants over the next year. That concludes my testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have for me today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I know Councilman Jones had asked for the callback, but I just have one quick question before I turn it over to the majority leader.
Yes, sir.
What is your and I kind of know the answer to this, but I just want to add for the record. What's been your relationship with the, I guess used to be the poverty reduction entity, now called the Promise Fund? Can you tell me what relationship and working relationship that you've had with them over the years? Because I know the goal is, both of you, is to reduce poverty. Some guys stood on the stage and threw out a number a couple of years ago. They want to reduce poverty by a significant number, but the pandemic kind of got in the way, but we haven't slowed up. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, sure. So I sit on the board for the Promise, helping to guide their work, and certainly both family sustainability portfolio and then the jobs portfolio. We also have a standing meeting with staff from the Promise around coordination. That's the mayor's policy office, Promise staff, and CEO staff. And so there's a level of alignment and coordination there around really working in partnership to create longstanding change in Philadelphia.
And can you say that we are seeing some incremental reductions? I know we're still have that unfortunate designation of being the highest level of people at or below the poverty line of the 10 largest cities, but are we seeing incremental reduction?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, when CEO was created 10 years ago, we were around 28% poverty. We're a little over 22% poverty in the city. So it's still high, but there have been significant reduction over that time period. I also think like CTC and EITC, those initiatives that were highly successful during COVID, reduced child poverty nationwide by half. And so you see the power of federal intervention playing out at the local level as being an important lever for poverty reduction. Certainly the additional supports during COVID help alleviate poverty, the ability for households to have additional dollars in their pockets, in their pocketbooks, to address their needs in real time. I think that's why you see this move towards guaranteed basic income projects, because we know as citizens, wherever you fall on the social economic scale, oftentimes what's best for us and how to best address our needs. And so issues like the GROW project will help us share real results around people being able to make good choices about their needs in their lives and address those needs accordingly. And so those are just some ways in which we're doing that. But I think it requires all of us to work in partnership. So that means every city department and everyone involved, right? Marshaling folks to move in the same direction, because certainly CEO can't do it alone. So it requires a strong sense of partnership and a level of coordination between the city, state, and federal partners. Yeah. I think moving forward, I think what we really need is to hold on to some of the innovation and interventions that we created during COVID. And so the ways that we were able to, again, work in partnership and solve longstanding issues, whether they be bureaucratic, funding stream restrictions, or unlikely partnerships. If we hold on to that energy and spirit, I think we'll continue to move the city forward. Thank you for your question.
Okay. Yeah, there's one little small follow-up, and then I'm sorry, Councilman Jones, I'll get to you right away. There is some concerns, well, at least in my mind, that as we reduce our numbers, and I'm glad to hear that we're showing some real movement in those numbers, that sometimes when the analysis is done, particularly in the case of Philadelphia, and it's a good thing, we have had a significant number of people moving into the city that are at higher incomes, And the concern is that moving the needle, calculating those individuals versus looking at the individuals that are at the poverty level and them moving in an upward above and beyond the poverty line. So when we do our calculation, we want to make sure that number is not skewed based on the upper income people moving into the city of Philadelphia, again, which is a good thing. But we don't want that to be the only template for us getting those numbers at a point we need to. So I'm hoping that when we do that analysis that we take into the account that could skew those numbers.
Great point, Council President.
Yeah, please don't let us because that happens. It has happened in other places. All right, thank you. Chair recognizes Councilman Jones.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Mr. Little, for agreeing to come back and take a deeper dive as to the impact of CEO. And the purpose of the callback was that in a brief amount of time that we had, there is no way that you could adequately describe the impact that your organization has on alleviating poverty. From the prisons where you reduced some of the cost of being an inmate that was onerous for people to be able to even survive inside or to have communications with the outside. You took that on. And to all of the other funding that you do that you don't get direct credit for, but you wind up funding. So can you take a minute, tell me your total budget, and then some of the programs that you wind up funding, and then the programs you do direct delivery of services for?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for the question and the opportunity to share, Council Member. Like I said earlier, I think so. The budget for CEO is a little south of $30 million. We are a small department, as you know. We are the city's community action agency, which we're designated to receive and distribute community services block grant dollars. That annual award falls between $5.2, $5.3 million annually. That allows us to make some discretionary investments. I think our real power is what I alluded to earlier, is really around partnership. One, the ability to convene large tables or act as a backbone organization on specific pilots or programs. I think the ability to collaborate. We have opportunities to collaborate with national coalitions like the Fines and Fees Coalition or Cities for Financial Empowerment, working with other cities and municipalities, oftentimes dealing with the same issues, but varying in scale, and being able to bring back, I think, innovative approaches to the city, but also working with other city departments. We've had the benefit of working closely with the Mayor's Policy Office and the Managing Director, and our other sister agencies, most specifically in the Health and Human Services Cabinet, just to name a few. In 2019, we really tried to shift our work to an economic mobility framework. Again, at that time, the city was in a stage of growth and trying to connect underserved communities to that growth, I think, was paramount. And in light of disparities, and so systemic and institutional sort of disparities. So like the fines and fees work that you mentioned, and we could not have done it without the commissioner and prisons to help folks communicate either telephonically or through video. Reducing the cost of communication there is an example of that level of partnership. The We are also working on an ARD pilot, again, looking at the racial disparity in expungement rates, to be able to increase expungement rates with the help of Arnold Ventures. And so that's not our dollars, but dollars that are coming to the city to help, like I said, reduce disparity, allow folks to reduce that tail of the justice system and that criminal justice involvement and get on with their lives. And so those are two examples of like systems work in government and systems work in the criminal justice system.
So I think one of the superpowers is to convene, but another is to discern that you've realized that there are certain things that keep poor people poor. And you try to alleviate some of that, that debtors court is one of them, that when people wind up with exorbitant amounts of debt that sometimes are tacked on by debt collection agencies and others, you are trying to dig your way out of getting people from that yoke around their neck. Can you describe that process?
Yeah, so again, thank you for that. I mean, it's just another example of just great work happening in the city. And so Judge Wolf, who's a supervising judge for eviction court and the right to counsel work, the eviction diversion work, and seeing success there, identified sort of debt court as an opportunity additional economic burden to vulnerable Philadelphians. And so there are about 13,000 debt collection cases that are filed in Philadelphia each year. And oftentimes entities buy debt sort of wholesale. And then a lot of these cases sort of end up in a default judgment because people don't know that there's a case against them. They might be resistant to respond. And so judgments are made in the absence of these defendants. And these are like, on average, about $2,000 judgments against vulnerable folks. And if that judgment happens, then folks can end up with bad credit, inability to rent an apartment or to modify a mortgage. There are real economic consequences to them. The folks who are engaged in that court are 64% Black and brown folks. So again, surveying the area, I'm trying to add on to the momentum of good work already happening in Philadelphia, and always understanding and trying to address where the disparity exists and try to bring a sense of fairness and justice to an otherwise sort of unscrupulous sort of situation.
So someone once said the most expensive thing in America is being poor, because we pay more for everything from insurance rates to phone connectivity to everything. It has also been one of the pet peeves of my former colleague, Alan Dom, who said that we wind up leaving, on average, poor people, $11,000 per household on the table in uncollected benefits. Can you talk about that and what a Benephilly type program could do if we had one point of contact, enter information that could codify everything that someone is eligible for to be able to get out of entitlements and or programs? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. A point of pride of the office is working with benefits for a long time, multi-year investment, which our nonprofit partners say are important, just the multi-year support to be able to do work and to increase that work. CEO work with partners, including Campaign for Working Families and our Latino Coalition, as an example, around tax preparation. So CEO generated over $28 million in refunds for low-income communities. And these refunds were timely and important because of coming out of COVID, right? And folks were just seeing historic levels in refund. Cross-reference them over to our financial empowerment centers as an example that provide one-on-one financial counseling to help folks make decisions around driving down debt, savings, and making long-term financial choices for like an automobile or home ownership or something like that. Again, with our sort of benefits-related work and our community engagement, CEOs working with the health department and DBH IDS around the Medicaid wind down as an example. So that's something timely. Assisting residents with Medicaid and CHIP recertifications that ramped up in April and continue over the next 12 months. Next month, we'll start in earnest, really connecting to communities in community around the need to recertify and helping folks get those benefits that they need. So again, like big dollar amounts to put money back in Philadelphia's pockets is an example of like the CTC and EITC work, but also like timely and working with city departments, big departments like DBH IDS and the health department to help mobilize our efforts in community because of our our expertise in sort of working in community and with community members.
Mr. President, I don't see why we couldn't, in all of our offices, have that beneficiary apparatus connected. The virtue of it is if I come in for LIHEAP help, I can put my income demographic information where I live, and it will spit out everything that I'm qualified for. That's a lot of reduction of steps that all of our staff want to have having to fill out individual applications for people when we could have one central application. And I would like, Mr. Little, if you could advise us on how we can have that so that we can do outreach from our particular offices. Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome, sir. Councilman, we actually, in the process, particularly with the Promise Fund, then called the Anti-Poverty Initiative, there was a decision made to actually solicit community-based organizations to do the bulk of that work because they were, one, obviously frontline. They were out in the community every day. And a number of them actually had done assistance on taxes, tax preparation as an executive, working families party. Mitch, what's the name of the group up in
Campaign for Working Families?
Campaign for Working Families. I know that they did tax preparation. So we actually contracted with them and a couple of other organizations to do that frontline work as a one-stop shop. And they've been relatively successful, but I agree, the more the merrier, the more opportunities that we have in our offices that are in a position to provide service. Just like you said earlier in the beginning of your conversation, the amount of money we're leaving on the table continues to be ridiculous. I mean, at the end of the day, particularly those most in need. So whatever needs to be done, we should figure out a way to get it done. I concur. You done, Councilman? Yeah. Okay, I think we had Councilwoman Lozada.
Thank you, Council President. I just have a question. My question is related to what you were just talking about. I work for one of those community-based organizations that provide that one-stop shop type of service. But oftentimes we would hear from people who would say, I've been to multiple community-based organizations that were supposed to offer this type of service, but I didn't get it. Do we know, or are we able to track the number of organizations who are supposed to be these types of spaces? And if we do, is there a way for us to measure the services, how many people are they seeing, what types of services were rendered, and how do we determine whether they actually went through the whole entire process of what someone was qualified for or not?
So for the benefit centers, it's a computer-based application that folks are taken through to assess the availability of benefits. I think as we expanded both the definition and the types of benefits made available to sort of what Council President was speaking to community members, I think we were leaning. I think the idea is to lean on the sort of trusted relationship that community groups have in their community, and the ability to expand both how we connect folks to benefits and what we call benefits. So everything from housing related benefits or federal benefits and anything in between. So I think that there are mechanisms in place to sort of track and to assess those results. I think one of the struggles is the impact of COVID. And in my opinion, council person, we have not seen the full impact of COVID. Psychological, there have been a lot of folks isolating and social isolation, and bringing organizations back online to do the bulk of their services in person has been a process. And I'm just speaking more generally about the nonprofit community, and then vacancies within the nonprofit community. And so I think that things are getting better as we understand what the new normal is. But I think it's a process connecting folks to opportunities. And that's why CEO has partnered to be able to go where people are and do everything from knocking on doors to digital outreach to phone banking to get folks connected to the services that they need. As an example, in a survey conducted by Philly Counts residents said that utilities was high on their list in regards to the most pressing issues. Now we see really, and kudos to the water department and other partner city agencies to really coalesce around reducing strain and stress around the water obligation for communities and working in partnership around that. So that's just an example of like how you get real time information, in-person information from community members, and that turns into a real broad-based efforts from the administration in partnership with multiple departments.
If it's possible, I'd like to know who the community-based organizations are who do that service in the 7th Council District, and how are they performing? They're all very close in proximity to each other, and so I'd like to see how they're performing. What services are they offering? How are they able to connect with folks in the community? We're also out in the community every Wednesday, and we provide that wraparound service as well as an office. And so if there are others in the community when we are out, I'd like to be able to say, hey, X organization is here and they offer this type of resource. So I'd like to be able to do that on a regular basis if possible.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Councilwoman. Any additional questions by members of the committee for this witness? There being none, I want to thank you very much. Thank you, Mitch, and continue your good work. And we look forward to
thank you, sir. Appreciate
bringing that number down below 20%, so we can say we did it, right?
Yes, sir. All right. Appreciate your leadership.
All right. Thank you, sir. Have a good one. Mr. McDermott, our next witness is
Our next witness is the Director of Public Safety Technology for the Police Department, Michael Vidro.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Council President.
Good morning. Hey, Deputy, how are you?
Good morning, Council President. How are you? And good
I
morning
am
to
blessed.
all council members. I'm John Stanford, First Deputy Commissioner of Police Department here, standing in for Commissioner Outlaw. Just wanted to introduce, as has already been done, Michael Vidro, the Director of Public Safety Technology for police. I know there were some questions around the acoustic gunshot detection system. And so Michael here is the expert. So wanted to make sure that we presented him to yourself, Council President, and the members of council so that you can address any issues or concerns you may have. I'll be on the line along with Staff Inspector Fran Hilly, the Special Advisor to the Commissioner. But it's all yours, sir.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Dan. We appreciate it. Yeah, thank you, Deputy. Yeah, just wanted to do a follow-up, to set a little background. We have been having conversations over the last several years about whatever technology we can use to enhance our public safety initiatives. We in City Council have traveled to a number of municipalities and looked at various options. We went to Chicago years ago, looking forward to another trip out there, to figure out a way to do what we need to do to make us a safer community. And the most recent conversation that we've had, and I want to thank you all, Mike and your team and the police department for working with us to talk about two particular initiatives. One was ShotSpotter, something that has been in place in a number of municipalities across the country. And then the most recent, I guess, homegrown product talked about recognition. Acoustical recognition was something that I understand that was possibly a better or a more productive or more efficient or less costly strategy. So we wanted you to come back and just kind of give us your perspective on where we are, just an analysis of both. Ultimately, both we may end up using, but most importantly, as we are in this budget process where we go, we were fortunate enough to unveil a number of real-time security cameras around recreation centers. As you know, a couple of weeks ago, had an unfortunate incident the following week, but they did their job. They caught the alleged perpetrator in full view with a high-def camera. So as we move forward, we obviously will continue to budget money for whatever type of technology. But Mr. Vidro, if you could just kind of tell us this quick snapshot of the conversation that we've had about the two, and then your perspective on, where we either need to go or what we need to be looking towards as we make decisions on the budget process. I know that was a long statement, but just wanted to lay some background.
Yeah, I think I got it. So first thing we have to understand is the technology. So we have ShotSpotter, we have our system. At the very lowest rung of that technology is the sensor itself. So what we developed in between 2015 and 18, we did an extensive pilot, we did an extensive study in partnership with Temple University and Dr. Jerry Radcliffe, who collected all the data and published a study after our pilot. So one of the very first things we understood was that any type of gunshot technology is not going to deter crime. That was pretty evident. So the study led us down the road of, okay, what can we do with this technology? So what I developed in that time period was a self-designed system that took advantage of the sensor itself rather than the process. So what we did is we start with a sensor, and the reason I designed it this way is because we don't want to be beholden to any manufacturer or any type of vendor of any kind. So one thing that I understood very clearly as a technologist in the very beginning is a gunshot sensor is a gunshot sensor is a gunshot sensor. Most of these sensors rely on microphones, some form of smarts and a board to take those sounds in, those ambient noises in, and pick out gunshots or what they think are gunshots. So one thing that you don't really have to be a a really smart technologist to understand is that when you have these types of sensors, they're only using one sense, one thing. So basically they're using ears, if I could put it really simply, to here's a bunch of ambient noise and pick out the gunshot based on a predetermined algorithm that's programmed into the board. That's how every single sensor works. So one thing I intimately understand is that one single sensor, one sense, is not going to be enough for anything to determine what is a gunshot and what is not. And I can kind of make the analogy as you're a human being and you have a brain. So you deploy at least 3 sensors when you hear a gunshot or you think you hear a gunshot. You've got eyeballs, you've got ears, and you can feel a percussion when a gunshot goes off. And we can't possibly expect a gunshot sensor with only the ears part to fully determine that. So that's where the human factor comes in. So ShotSpotter technology relies on a human being somewhere in a call center, receiving that, looking at a oscilloscope stream and rubbing that up against their algorithm to determine, yes, that's a gunshot or not a gunshot, and then sending the alert. So what I set out to do was to take our existing technology, our video technology, and try to add a set of eyeballs. And at the same time, add a set of ears to our cameras. At the time and still today, those cameras are on a blind tour. They're just kind of touring and looking around, but it's a camera. So my idea was to put a set of ears on that camera. So that gunshot sensor now became a lot less important that it be accurate. All it has to do is at least as almost as accurately as the human ear decide maybe that's a gunshot. So what that does is it stops our camera and spins toward the location of that sound. So at the very same time, within a second, that alert comes through our VSS system. So the watch center at the DIVIC, they get alerted in real time exactly when the shot happens, and they have eyeballs now. There's your second set of sensors. So the human being now is looking at the camera and being able to determine, is it a gunshot with at least the eyeball, right? Because he's now looking around deciding, is there people running? He may not even see a gunshot, but he can determine, or she can determine, that something is happening there. So therefore we dispatch. So there's no automated dispatch of any kind, reducing the resources we require to go out to false alarms, basically. So that's the sensor package we put together, and making it very important to understand that the sensor is irrelevant. As long as the sensor is as accurate as a human ear, or maybe a little bit more accurate, we rely more heavily on the process by which that operator looks and determines, yes, that's a gunshot. No, that's not a gunshot. And that whole process right now, we were able to get that down to about a 15 to 30 second on an unfounded gunshot. And it happens, it's a very automated process. He doesn't have to touch anything. The screen pops up, shows him real-time video versus the gunshot video. And within 10 to 15 seconds, he can do a tour, manually look around. And if he sees anything that he determines, okay, that's suspicious, then he can get on the radio right from real-time crime and dispatch a police officer to that scene. So a couple things that did for us is again, we're not married to any specific vendor. So we've tried to get ShotSpotter over the years to provide us a sensor so that we can do a side-by-side comparison. And in my mind, I already understand what that's going to look like. That's going to be, their sensor is probably just as good as our sensor. Their process is different than our process. And that's where the trick comes in. So they've never volunteered a sensor. And quite frankly, their model doesn't allow you for access to that raw data. My sensor, I can dig into that sensor. I can look at every single event that happened, every noise event, and make an analysis on that. Any data that it's provided by, that I get from ShotSpotter would be provided by ShotSpotter, and that's a problem. I can't have them, wrap their data in a nice, pretty package and say, this is our data. And, we have no ability to dig into the raw data. So we can only go by what they tell us. So I'm pretty sure even today, if we asked them to do, just give us your sensor and let us take a look at the data that's coming out of the sensor, they probably wouldn't let us do that. So any side-by-side evaluation, Pepsi challenge is it's not going to get us anywhere. I feel that we've done a very comprehensive, over 2 years, study on the technology as a whole, as a program as a whole, and developed the most efficient way of using our sensors. So where we sit today is we're constantly evaluating these things. So just like we do the cameras, we just don't pick a camera, stick it up there. We're constantly evaluating different types of camera technology, and sensors go right along with that. So right now we're evaluating 2 additional sensors, and the difference with these sensors and ShotSpotter, those vendors are going to allow us access to the raw data, and they're also going to allow us to do a side-by-side sensor comparison. And that's not to say that we're always going to be using Century IP. I guarantee at some point, probably the next year or two, that we're going to switch over to this other product. But that doesn't become a huge RFP process or anything like that, because these sensors are just like cameras. We can buy them the same way we buy our cameras. We have cooperative contracts, we have city contracts already in place, and this is what we consider an ancillary device. You know, so if I was to want to go buy a motion sensor, I don't have to put an RFP out to do a motion sensor for my camera system. It comes from the vendor that already sells us that ancillary devices. So trying to narrow that back down to, if this isn't a full-blown gigantic enterprise system that we have to do a multi-year, you know, subscription costs, things like that, we narrow that all the way back down to, if the sensor, right now, the sensors the problematic part about our sensors right now is they're very expensive. The ones we're deploying right now, they're about $10,000 a piece. The sensors we're looking at right now are, the most expensive one is about $2,500 a piece. So if we can determine that that sensor does as good as a job as our Century product does now, then it's just a matter of ordering that product and putting it into our package. The package that was designed is city proprietary, city intellectual property. It was my design. We hold all the drawings, everything for it. It's that unitized device that mounts the sensor array, which would be the microphone and that board, but it's interchangeable. We can pick different microphones if we want to. We can pick different sensors if we want to, and deploy them as needed. And these are all one-time costs because the sensor is unsophisticated. It's a board, you know, and the problem is when one breaks down, do we want to spend $10,000 to replace it? You know, I'm trying to get us to a point where these sensors are $500 a piece, and that's, you know, less than a quarter of the cost of a camera. So that's just a way, in my opinion, a way more efficient way of doing it than signing up for ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter right now is about, talking to Rochester police chief a few days ago, they're up to about $110,000 per square mile per year. So we're 143 square miles. So if you can do the math around that, right now our coverage is somewhere on the order of about 7 to 10 square miles. The other part of our sensor is it allows us to rapid deploy it. It allows us to move it. ShotSpotter, once they quote unquote get rid of the crime in that area, you can't move that array. Now you've got to buy another array. But you know, everybody in law enforcement understands you don't ever really get rid of crime. It just moves. When we clear it out in this area, it moves to the next area. So ShotSpotter's model, you know, if I can say, to me, it's unscrupulous a little bit, because rather than allow you to move those sensors, they're going to get you to buy another 10 square miles to cover that area. So that goes counter to their message that we're going to help you clear out your city. You know, we're going to help you clear the crime out of your city. Our study found that there is no deterrent. First of all, you can't even see the sensors usually. Nobody knows that they are sensors. So that doesn't really deter. We can put a message out, but that's still not a deterrent really. So to me, it's, again, very misleading at best. So our sensor allows us to put them up as we feel fit. We have somewhere on the order of about 1,500 different camera locations across the city that we can, part of the pilot, we put one of the sensors up and way up in the Northeast somewhere and had our VSS crew on a timer, see how long it takes you to get it off that pole, move it to South Philly in the 1st District. And it was under 2 hours. And that was with traffic and everything else to be able to redeploy that sensor. So right now we deploy 34 sensors that are fully deployed right now. We hold back about 10 sensors for rapid deployment. And then we have about 5 sensors that we hold back for broken sensors, to, you know, rapid replacement type sensors. We rely on the Intelligence Bureau and the Research Analysis Group to determine where best to place those sensors. But again, just like the cameras, they're not really a deterrent. They're more of an investigative tool. And we have examples of being able to catch you know, shot in real time and respond. But any sensor that you have is not, you know, until they invent a button in these sensors that allows you to hit a button and drop a cop on the spot, you know, they're not going to catch it. They're typically not going to catch somebody in the act. The best we can hope for is that now, because the camera was focused on that scene instead of looking the other way because of the dumb machine, now we can say, at least we see who the shooter was, who he was shooting at. Maybe we catch him going away. We see the car that he gets away in, and we can almost guarantee that that camera is going to be looking in the right direction.
Right. So thank you. Just a couple of follow-ups. So just want to make sure that we're clear that the ShotSpotter, which you're not suggesting is not a good initiative, but is probably more expensive. It is the hardware and the data is owned by the company. So you contract with this company, they do the installations, they do all other aspects, and they essentially report to you when there's a shot or when whatever happens, report to the police, and then the police respond to that report in whatever way, shape, or form they deem necessary. The mobility is an issue. You're saying that once it's installed in that location, it's not like we can do like with our dumping cameras, as an example, just move them to another location. You basically have to expand the coverage and the acreage in terms of being able to deploy additional cameras. Our ability, I think we, at one point I understood, was called acoustical recognition. We have more flexibility in the deployment and the mobility. Sounds like it's a little less costly, which from a budget perspective is clearly something that
it's a lot less.
Okay, so we are clearly, although we can't ever spend too much money to stop to deal with the crime and violence. With respects to things other than homicides or shootings, because we are actually thinking back to when we one of those trips that council took, we went to Baltimore, and there were some real-time cameras, and they were looking at known quote-unquote drug areas where you literally saw drug sales in real time, and they were able to actually call on the device and call the person and basically got the people as they were standing there selling drugs. So I could see it could be utilized for something like that. Okay, can you and I know we like I said, we've been talking about this for a while, just for a follow-up as we get to the final conclusions, because we're going to have to put more money in our surveillance systems. Just something we need to be doing, and I understand that we have some more deployment that we're going to be doing over the next several weeks and months around schools and other locations. If you can just give us an analysis of, as an example of, say, ShotSpotter for a particular time in terms of the acreage, the coverage, the pros and cons versus acoustical recognition, and some of the things that we can do there. And I'm not trying to, focus you one way or another. We just want real facts, because we're going to, based on everything I've heard from our colleagues and actually the administration and the need from the police department, need to have more coverage with some really good cameras. That camera feed that we got from the Denby playground shooting was really, really, really tight. I mean, that high def feed was awesome, and I hope it will ultimately lead into a capture of the individual, the perpetrator. So if you could just provide that to us, it would be very helpful.
As far as my insights on the furtherment of the play zone and the extension of our VSS program?
Yeah, this how much, just give a scenario on the ShotSpotter and the acoustical recognition. Because that, it's gonna come down to this particular budget process. And, like I said, we gotta, I think, another month before we gotta make decisions. And everybody pretty much said we had to put more money in coverage. So as we make those decisions, we like to have something that guide us on how much and where we should.
The concentration definitely should be on the deployment of cameras, not as a deterrent, but as an investigative tool. So we determined during our study that gunshot detection was not an outlier when it came to investigation. If the gunshots happen, somebody calls 911, our non-censored camera picks up some footage of that. The detectives arrive on scene, the collection of the shell casings, all that stuff is going to happen without the gunshot sensor. So again, if I can go back to, unless we can hit a button and put a cop on the scene instantly, it becomes less and less of a useful sensor. So now we measure the cost of that sensor. Is it worth us $10,000 per sensor? In my opinion, absolutely not. $1,200 a sensor, maybe a lot more palpable, a lot more digestible, because now we can kind of look at that as a sensor, not as a crime initiative, not as a way to stop crime. It's just to help these investigators solve these crimes and put the bad guys away. On the other hand, the more coverage that we have, obviously, is going to exponentially improve our chances.
Yeah.
If we had a camera on every corner, then obviously we're going to catch a whole lot more evidence. So historically, the VSS program, up until very recently, within the last few years, and I think even as far as last fiscal year, it's only ever been funded for the Class 400. In other words, more equipment of about $300,000 a year. It started off in the very beginning, and when I started the program back in 2012 at about 750, and then it reduced to 300. So that's where I think that budget, should be increased, definitely, to allow us more flexibility and more planning to deploy these cameras. What's happening right now is we do a refresh every 4 years. We just did a refresh in last year, 2022. And that refresh was planned way back in September of the year before for budget, right? And our anticipation was we were putting up cameras anywhere from 50 to 100 cameras a year per clip over those years. So naturally, when I designed and architected the refresh, I planned for that expansion, and I times it by 2 at best, So that was what our refresh was based on. In the meantime, Play Zone came into play, the money came in for that, and that put a lot of strain on the system. Now we've got to do a very rapid refresh now, and we're actually about to spend about $1.5 million in expanding the system out to about 6,000 cameras. And the reason we do that is because we really can't be adding every single year. It's not really sustainable that way. Number one. Number two, the licensing and things like that go along with the video management system, the Genetec system, really don't jive. We have to do that in a kind of a lump sum scenario. So I plan that naturally around our refresh periods. So what we're trying to get to right now, which, thank you to council that we did receive that funding, because that's going to allow us to catch up. Sheriff's Department is loaded and ready to deploy somewhere on the order of 250 cameras. Some of these are multi-lens cameras. We're obviously about 150 cameras into the Safe Play Zone for rec centers, and we have another 150 coming before the end of July rather, to be deployed as well. And so that's going to allow us, we're going to hopefully be right in time to do that refresh. But again, where I think the funding goes best is toward that annual budget to allow us some more flexibility and some coordination to, when somebody decides to throw 1,000 cameras at us, right. we'd like a little bit more heads up so that we can plan the technology out better.
Okay. All right. We're juggling a lot of balls, so
absolutely.
We have to,
I said it with a smile on my face.
A lot of different things. All right. Thank you.
No
Thank you. There's a couple other council members that have some questions. Chair recognizes Councilman Harity.
Excuse me 1 second, Council President.
Yeah.
Just want to let you know I'm present.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Councilman. How are you?
You're welcome.
Councilman Harity?
Hey, good morning, Council President. Good morning, Michael. My question has to do with the gunshot monitors. And I understand, I like you were saying, where the police can only get there so fast once a gunshot monitor goes off, and it's actually hard to try to catch people because they're getting away, response times, stuff like that. Is there any research going into what would happen if we actually hook drones up to those gunshot monitors so that once they go off, a drone could fly in and we wouldn't stop the shooting victims, but we would actually maybe catch some more people by being able to get the getaway car's license plate or maybe a picture of them. It just seems like technology's moving so fast nowadays. I'd like to know, what our plan is with that, and if there's other drones, if you think drones would actually help with the process of catching some of these shooters. Thank you.
No problem. So as a technologist, I'm always looking out for the next and best technology. And right now, by trade, I'm an integration engineer. That's what I do. So I take the square peg and try to fit it into the round hole, make it work. And right now, just looking at it at a high level, high altitude, I'm sure that's possible. I just don't know what the if we have a camera that already looks at that and captures as much as it can, I see what you're saying, maybe more high definition, more close-in views. I just don't see any way that we would be able to automate that process with the current drone technology. Maybe in the future, absolutely. AI is starting to crack into drone technology, and it usually takes a few years for that to catch up. And I have to say right now, my entire life is in technology. This is the most rapid development, era that we're in. A couple of years ago, AI was kind of a, waste of money, but now AI is doing many, many other things for us outside of video technology. We're talking about data analysis, things like that, that they're making leaps and bounds by the minute, literally by the month. So I do anticipate, honestly, if somebody gets that idea in their head and wants to design that thing, it's definitely feasible for that to happen, but just probably not at this time. And then trust me, we are on top of things like that, as far as any type of technology that integrates with video, because that's my primary focus, is that whole video integration piece. That's the body worn video, everything else that goes along with that. Hopefully that answered your question.
Nice. All right. It's my question. Also,
Yeah, Councilman,
yes, I know that we're getting more and more cameras up, and that's a good thing. But what can you? Yes.
You're breaking up, sir.
Councilman, your feed is
Michael. Can you hear
really
me?
bad. Can you say it again? Yeah, your feed was real bad. Can you repeat your question, please?
Yeah. Okay. I know we have the cameras when we're getting more. That's good stuff. But I'd like to know manpower to monitor the cameras. I know that when I was talking with the commissioner during the hearings, that was an issue, actually having enough people to monitor the cameras, the crime cameras that we have. For instance, in Kensington, where I live, there's a lot of crime cameras on the corners of where these drug activity is, but not much enforcement from what I see of actually taking care of these drug dealers. How short are we in that aspect, and what could we do to make that better?
So the best way that we can understand this is that excuse me. The best way we can understand this is that it's just basic math. Right now we have 1,750 city-owned feeds and about altogether about almost 6,000 feeds that are being monitored. And in order to monitor those cameras in real time, you're going to need somewhere on the order of about 1,000 people to do that. So to effectively do that. So we ask ourselves, is this an investigative tool or is it a real-time monitoring tool? So on the technology end of that, there's obviously very, very many scenarios where a manned monitor type of situation, like in building security, that's very effective, very feasible. You're inside the building, everything's contained in that building. When we're on a city grid, that doesn't become very effective. So we try to use the technology in the most effective manner. And so what we've done as far as the monitoring goes, I don't think it's very clear to everyone. It's just not the watch center that's monitoring these cameras. Every district has access to their own cameras and can monitor those cameras within their district, and we rely on them to pick up the real-time type of stuff that happens. But I don't think we're ever going to get to a point, unless we want to stop putting cameras up and stop right here and say, let's go hire 1,000 people to monitor these cameras. And even then, we're back to that whole sensor thing again, right? So if a sensor is doing that, and it only costs us a fixed price for that sensor for the rest of our lives, for the rest of the life of that sensor, even a sensor or a human, even if you see it happening, as far as being able to dispatch in a timely manner, that's always going to be a problem. Again, until somebody can invent a button that drops a cop out of the sky, that's the only thing, in my opinion, that'll fix that. I can't answer to the response teams.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I get that, and that the line with, you need the same number of people to monitor the cameras as their cameras. my thing is these cameras are recording, correct? And why can't somebody go back in these we know where the drug corners are. I mean, it's no secret in my neighborhood where they are and who is the people doing it. They're there. I don't understand why we can't be looking at these cameras to build cases against these. And I get that maybe you are doing that, but you know, it seems to me to be a slow process, and I'm not seeing any results. You know, and this is something that, in my mind, I need to see some results. I mean, there's nothing going on. I have 2 corners around the corner from my house. The cameras are right there. There's 20 of them out there. There's not 1 or 2 hiding in a corner. They don't care. My question is just, how do we get somebody to go back through these tapes daily on these corners that we know are known drug corners, and start getting this information of who's who, who's doing what, and then start trying to prosecute these people? You know, that's just what I'm trying to get at. I just don't get it. I understand that you're shorthanded all over the place and all that stuff, but you don't need somebody actually sitting there monitoring the camera 24 hours a day. You just need somebody to go back and say, all right, there's so-and-so. He just did a hand-to-hand. Let's document that. Bam. Start building our case towards either RICO or anything like that. I understand RICO is a federal thing, but whatever we can do with these people, because these are very organized groups, and I get that, and they're hard to catch. I get that. But it's just frustrating to see these cameras sitting there. But every day I come home to 30 of them waving at me, trying to slow me down so they can sell me shit.
Yeah.
You know, excuse my language.
Deputy, Councilman, I think the Deputy Commissioner wants to respond to that. Deputy Stanford.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I can step in. And so, Councilman, to your point, good morning. In your area, just so you're aware, when you say that nothing has been done, our men and women are working very hard in that area. Just in the last year or so.
That's not what I'm saying, Chief, and you know that.
But I just wanted to give you some stats to kind of.
I'm one of the biggest supporters of police that you have. It's just frustrating when somebody who lives in a neighborhood and drives past that every single day, and I have to look up and see these cameras, and it's like a stick in my eye. You understand what I'm saying? And I have to go home and hear my residents ask me every night what's going on with that and what's going to happen. And look, I get that they're shorthanded and the cops are overwhelmed in my neighborhood. My neighborhood is to the extreme. It's not like most neighborhoods. I get all that. I'm not trying to accuse anybody of doing anything. All I would like to know is what we on city council can do to help you guys get that done. I'm just a little frustrated, and I get that we're having a hiring problem with police officers in general, but I just think that maybe if we could put some more money in there for actual people to monitor these high crime areas, just to document stuff so that we can start trying to prove a case. I'm not trying to blame anybody. I know that the police officers in my area are A1. They do their job. They're out there every day. I know it's got to be frustrating to them too. But, you know, I'm just trying to get to the root of what can we do as a council to help you guys get some of this stuff under control. Is there money we can put in for personnel that maybe aren't police officers now that we're allowed to hire some civilian officers? I would think that maybe data analysts might be able to help out a little bit more with trying to compile some of this data on some of these gangs, because these are organized gangs. They're organized crime. And that's all I'm asking. What can we do to help you guys? How much money would it actually take?
Let the commissioner answer the question, please.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I'm just trying to give you some background on all of the things you're saying we are doing in terms of we have analysts that are looking each and every day, working very hard, both in the districts as well as in the DIVIC. compiling information, gathering data on pedestrian investigations, vehicle investigations, to identify those individuals that are involved. That's a part of our biggest strategy, is identifying those that are involved so that we aren't just creating collateral damage to people that are not involved, right? And so that's one piece of it. But in addition to that, even so much as we utilize each one of those cameras in an investigative tool, which is what you're referencing of going back and building cases, we do that now. In order to have someone do that to the point that you're referencing of going back through those cameras every day and looking at that, that would kind of go to the point that Director Vidro was making, that you would still need a number of people in order to analyze that. Would be almost the same of doing it in real time. And so, again, I think we're open and would welcome civilian staff and professional staff to do that, because, again, that gives us an added part to that in terms of outside of police officers actually doing it that can communicate. So, yeah, if that's an opportunity, yes, we welcome that. But a lot of that work is being done now, utilizing, to your point about building those RICO type of charges and cases. We're doing that now. We have the ATF, DEA, FBI, U.S. Attorney's Office, the District Attorney's Office. Everyone is collectively working together on a lot of these issues, particularly in East Division. Some of those take a little bit more time in order to be able to do some press to let you know what's being done. But again, in that area, there are a number of gun arrests. Again, I was just looking over the last 6 months or so, 20-something guns have been arrested just in that area around your block. Just in even so much as 130-something narcotic arrests just in the area around your block. I'm not talking about the entire division. And so there is a lot of work that's being done. And so the cameras don't always act as a deterrent, but they do provide us an additional investigative piece. And so we're using them in that way. I think your frustration is the frustration that we have, the frustration that many people and citizens in this city have, right? And so we share that frustration in terms of addressing the violent crime, the quality of life issues. We share that. Trust me, if we had a way where we can stop this and shut it down instantly, trust me, we would. And so we all have family that live in many of these communities and are from many of these communities. So your frustration, your passion, and your commitment to that, I completely understand. But that's also lies within many men and women in this organization, including myself, that want to make sure we're giving it everything we have every day and are giving it everything we have. And so, again, as far as the prosecution piece, that's another piece. And we're working with the DA's office to try to address some of those issues as well, to get some of these people either, higher bail and, again, pushing it through the prosecution piece, and then the judges as well. And so we're working behind the scenes to get a lot of that done. And a lot of meetings coming up to push on that a little bit more. But I understand your frustration. I just want to, again, just point out that a lot of those things we are doing now, and trust me, the men and women are pressing every day, and I appreciate you acknowledging that, but they are pressing every day throughout the city, trying to tamp down on some of this crime.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Only one other question. How many actual areas in the city are designated high crime areas?
So statistically, we have about 6 districts that 6 to 8 districts that drive our overall crime. As you know, the beginning of the year, we focused on the 4 districts that drive 43% of our gun violence, which are the 39th district, 22nd district, 24th district, and 25th district. And so we have compiled additional resources, pulled people out of administrative positions, and put them back into those areas so that we could get more police on the ground, more boots on the ground, more of a presence to address some of those things. And so, again, those are the 4 areas that make up 43% of the gun violence that we've seen. But overall, it's about 8 districts that compile most of our violent crime. Again, in those other remaining districts, they still have quality of life issues that we can't ignore. And so, again, not just focusing on the violent crime, but making sure we're addressing what's important to everybody in every neighborhood in this city.
Thank you, Deputy. Thank you, Council President. That was interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. We are all very frustrated about this whole environment. It's really a drag on our city. But we got to keep focused. We got to keep moving. Can't give up. Can't give up.
Exactly. I'm
Councilwoman
just
Lozada.
trying to figure out how we can help. That's
Yeah,
all.
yeah, we gotta figure this out. Councilwoman Lozada, you had a comment or question, or either?
I had a comment, pretty much, I heard, Mr. Vidro mention, that every district has cameras that they should be monitoring on their own. And I want to make sure that we are realistic, right? These districts, 2 of the highest crime districts are within the pinpoint area. They're in my district. I appreciate and I applaud the men and women of the 24th and 25th Police District because they bust their chops every day to serve and protect communities like mine. But it is unrealistic to expect for them who are consistently short to be responsible for monitoring cameras. When we know very well that on a daily basis, they don't even have cars to put on the street. I work very closely with my captains. For years, I've been working very closely with the captains. And so I know what happens on the ground. So when we're making requests in order to make things better, please let us make realistic requests and let us make requests that we know we can deliver. Because that is an unrealistic expectation of them. And I don't want to be a council person that will set my people up to fail, because they may work for you all, the police department, but I believe they're part of my family, right? They protect and serve me and my family and the people that I represent. So let's make realistic requests and let's have realistic expectations. I'm excited about the new cameras that are going up. And I understand my colleague Harity's frustrations, but I don't want to continue to be smoke and mirrors. I want us to make real decisions with realistic expectations so that we can really bring change in the neighborhood.
Ma'am, if I could just jump in regards to the use of cameras in the districts, that's not usually done by active personnel. That's usually done by restricted or limited personnel who would not be on the street, as well as analysts. And so, again, that's what that references. It's usually not taking anybody that would be in a car or on foot patrol to have them now sit inside and use a camera. That's usually done by folks that are limited, restricted for some reason. And instead of just having them sit around idly and do nothing, we again try to have them trained quickly and access those cameras to be the eyes and ears to do the things that exactly Councilperson Harity addressed in terms of being able to watch it in real time and radio that information. I think I provided an example of when I utilized that same type of technology with one of my restricted officers when I was in the 19th district and did just that. We were able to recover 3 guns off of 200 block of Simpson Street because I had an officer that was in restricted capacity, couldn't work the street. So he was utilizing the cameras while he's inside, radioing to officers that were working out on the street in real time, observed someone with a gun that he knew should not be in possession of a gun because of his prior interaction, directed those officers there, and we're able to make that recovery. And so that's being utilized. So again, can we have more personnel or more people utilized to do that? Absolutely, absolutely. And again, if that is the possibility of getting more professional staff, civilian personnel to do that, we are very open to that and welcome that with open arms. It's just getting them in and then getting them trained to do that, and absolutely being able to communicate with our uniformed personnel to make those arrests when appropriate.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yes, ma'am.
Very quickly, so it wasn't misconstrued. I didn't mean that we had dedicated monitors all the time in those districts. What I meant was that we're in the first year of a 3-year rollout right now of mobile devices for every police officer. And part of that rollout and those applications on those devices is the monitoring of the cameras. So that while they're not actively monitoring, but we're putting that technology into the police officer's hands so that now he can, it's just another set of eyeballs. So that camera in the crime center out of 1,800 feeds is not a camera that anybody cares about in the watch center unless something is actually happening or alerting. However, that officer on the street has the ability now to pull up a camera right around the corner from him and be able to see something happening in real time and using that. So while we don't count that as a real time monitor, or as somebody actually sitting there dedicated to monitoring the cameras. It's just that's the approach that we're trying to take, is that we already understand that a security guard sitting looking at TVs all day long is not going to be an effective measure. However, putting those cameras in front of every cop that we can for the purposes of effecting an arrest or whatever they may need that camera view for, we give them that access. And that's been happening since we started the program, and we're able to deploy this out to the districts. And it's more for that, for a supervisor or somebody like that to kind of get a bird's eye view and a lifetime view of what's happening. And that obviously, if we calculate that measure and say, once we're fully deployed with 6,500 devices, which we look to be in fiscal 20, end of calendar fiscal 25, 25. That will probably be the most effective way that we can use these cameras and spread that monitoring across the entire department.
Good, Councilman? You good? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Vidra, I just want to make sure I understand, because it's you brought up an interesting issue. I remember, again, we're talking about these trips we used to take. We went to Baltimore like many years ago, and they actually had just rolled out their array of cameras all over the place. And they actually had these, they called them footballs. And they were these devices, they were pretty archaic, in the car, where the patrol person could actually pull up feed from the cameras in their sector from the car. And it sounds like you just referenced a similar version, or much more sophisticated version, where the patrol person can pull up the feed from a camera on their phone. Is that accurate? Did I hear that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So that helps them. All right.
Yeah, we've had the capability of doing it in MDT, but I have to agree with the executives that don't allow us to let the guys on an MDT watch it. MDT is the computer in the car, because it's distracting. We don't want them looking at cameras while they're trying to drive a car. So I was very excited when we came up with the mobility project, because I've always tried to find a platform to deploy this to every cop. And now that mobile device gives us, we've had the technology for years, just not a real platform to deploy it on outside of the districts themselves in a fixed location. But now we have about 1,500 devices deployed across the 25th, the entirety of East Division and Central right now. And there's about 1,500 devices that are deployed in those cops' hands. So to talk about KNA, the KNA district, every single one of those cops are either foot or bike patrols. That device is acting as their eyes for the cameras, their body-worn interaction with their body-worn cameras, as well as we're about to launch the ability for them to do searches on those devices. So, because right now, as it happens, if you're on a foot patrol and you need to run a plate or whatever you've got to do, you're going to get on the radio to do that. And we're going to give them the ability to do that right from the device.
So it expands the capability of that officer beyond their visual.
Absolutely.
Their personal visual. Yeah, that's something that we thought made sense back then. And okay, so now you're telling us that we're in a position of
I think it was just a matter of identifying the platform and getting the funding. Thanks again to council. In the last fiscal year, you guys approved a multi-year rollout of 6,500 devices over the next 3 years. So we received the first round of funding this fiscal year. It looks like we're going to get the funding again for next fiscal year. That'll take us out to about 3,500 devices next year, and then that next year out to 6,500.
Okay, sounds like a good use. Councilman Johnson, did I see earlier you had a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Chair recognizes Councilman Johnson.
Thank you, Council President.
You're
I
welcome.
want to thank Deputy Commissioner Stanford and Philadelphia Police Department for your hard work and your dedication in trying to keep our city safe, and also give support to our Commissioner Daniel Outlaw. My questions are regarding the homicide unit, and want to get an idea of one, how are we in terms of solving? Two, how are we doing as it relates to addressing non-fatal shootings? And then most importantly, in terms of the homicide unit, how are we interacting with families who have lost loved ones to gun violence, who have cold cases, in terms of keeping them informed, rather it's periodically, rather quarterly, but just reaching out to them from time to time and addressing their issues, and also the level of technology that we are using in personnel as it relates to expanding the homicide unit here in the city of Philadelphia, particularly around the issue of gun violence.
Deputy.
Good morning again, sir. Councilman Johnson. So our current clearance rate for homicides is around 65%, which is up significantly from last year. This time last year, we were around 45%. And so we're up significantly as it compares to that. And part of that restructuring at the beginning of the year, we rolled out, beginning of last year, in terms of combining all of our shooting investigation units throughout the city into one shooting investigation group called the SIG, which essentially investigates all non-fatal shootings. They work alongside our homicide unit. And so with that, we've also been able to increase clearance rates around non-fatal shootings as well. I don't have those numbers right in front of me, but I can get those to you. As it relates to technology, again, we're constantly working with our federal partners with some of the latest and greatest, if you will, with technology, as well as what we have available to us through our forensics unit. Again, I know you've heard from Director Garvey many a times through council hearings on what we're doing there as it relates to analyzing the ballistic evidence that's recovered at many of these scenes. So all of that combined has allowed us to continue to increase the positive results with investigations and increase that clearance rate. But having, again, those SIG detectives working alongside our homicide detectives has, I think, in terms of, again, increased the communication between some of these shootings that are occurring, as well as the clearance rate. With that being said, as it relates to those cold cases, there are dedicated detectives. Again, I'll get you the exact numbers. Dedicated detectives that constantly review those cold cases, and even working in terms of putting some of that information out through our communications unit, so that's information out to the public, constantly staying up on any new leads and making requests for any information as it relates to those type of cases. So that's still an area that we're continuing to work on and trying to enhance what we do there. As well as the communication with the families of many of these victims. There is a victim assistance officer that's assigned to our homicide unit, and they work in terms of continuing to have that communication along with the detectives' communication with the families of these homicide victims. Again, I will always say, when it comes to that type of communication, there's always room for improvement. It's never a perfect situation when someone loses a loved one. And there can never be too much communication. And so I will say that's an area where we can definitely look at any enhancements or any suggestions that may be out there that you may have, received from even victims' families, as to what would make them feel more welcomed, as in the level of communication or interaction that they can receive from our investigators.
How many staff members did you said it's only one staff member that's assigned to that unit? Because I think probably starting there with roughly 500 homicides over the last 3 years prior to you, becoming deputy commissioner, kind of begs the question, how come we are expanding that particular personnel team, specifically around victims who have lost loved ones to gun violence, and making sure the lines of communications are open. I remember, does all the detectives have cell phones now? Because I remember that was an issue some time ago. And then last, I just want to add this in here. And I work, I obviously have no problem working with law enforcement. It's always been my track record around the issue of gun violence. But I don't understand how you come before council during a budget hearing and dump numbers around non-fatal shootings and homicides. It kind of boggles my mind if gun violence is the #1 issue that we're addressing here in the city of Philadelphia. Could you elaborate on why we don't have those numbers?
In terms of the numbers, in terms of the clearance rate, or what is it that you were asking for? I may have misunderstood you, sir.
Clearance rate for non-fatal shootings as well as homicides.
No, so our clearance rate for our homicides right now are at 65%. Our non-fatal, I believe we were somewhere around, I believe start the year somewhere around 40%, but I'll get that exact number. I just don't have that right in front of me. And I want to get you as of most recent. But as it relates to we're increasing the victim assistance. We're in coordination right now of working to increase the victim assistance collaboration part as it relates to victim assistance. Again, I just found the numbers for non-fatal. We're at 25% for the year as far as the clearance rate. So again, that was a significant increase. If you recall, when we implemented the shooting investigation group, we were somewhere around 12% for non-fatal shootings. And so again, 25% is not something, again, to jump through the roof with joy for, but to see that we're progressing in a direction that's positive, going from that 12% that we once had, now we're at 25%. Again, that work through having the mobility project of having those phones available to us allows us to communicate. But a big piece, to be honest, is getting, community members and folks that are present when they see these shootings, the ability to cooperate with us. And again, that's a big piece, not just around homicides, but around the non-fatal shootings. I would say more so the non-fatal shootings than the homicides, of having, community members, again, give us that information and work with us when they know that there's something that's happening. And again, some of that is the relationships that we're building and continuing to try to build through patrol with community members each and every day. But that is one piece of that. So that is 25% as of today for non-fatal shootings and 65% for homicides.
And I'll wrap up on this last question the constituent asked me to ask. Can you give me an idea of the unit that deals with individuals who are transgender, and when there's a homicide, and how those type of transgender / LGBTQ investigations take place? Because I think, according to the constituent, he was under the impression that the personnel was scaled back, and I don't know if that's true or not true, but I told him I don't have a problem asking the question.
As it relates to when those type of incidents happen, again, we're working with the Office of LGBTQ liaison, as that's always one of the priorities of making sure that, again, with those type of incidents, that the sensitivity level is at its highest. Because again, combined with losing a loved one, but then the extra, if you will, components and elements of that, making sure that the sensitivity level is at its highest. And so that is something that we're constantly doing. And in terms of having our LGBTQ liaison officers, and our group hasn't been scaled back. And so again, we're continuing to work and to make sure that, again, that community, as well as all other communities, get the resources and again, the attention that they deserve and that they need. And so making sure that that's always a priority for us.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. All right.
Yes, sir. No problem,
Take
sir.
care.
Thank you. You too.
And good job on increasing those numbers as well. So whatever we can do to continue supporting those numbers continuously increasing with non-fatals, I think we're definitely going in the right direction. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'll pass that information on to the men and women that are investigating those incidents each day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Chair
You're welcome,
recognizes.
Council President.
Chair recognizes Councilman Driscoll.
Thank you, Council President. So my question centers around these boom parties. I represent the waterfront from Bucks County almost to Center City, and so I have 3 boat launches and several parks. And what's happening is a group text will go out, and maybe 20, 30, 40 cars show up. And then they set up these monster speakers, and they have, a lively party, not caring about the residents in the neighborhood or the people that are just recreating in the park. My question is, from an enforcement standpoint, what powers are on the books currently to address that, other than giving them a $25 citation? Can we confiscate the speakers?
So, sir, yes, we have been in a communication with the district attorney's office. In fact, Deputy Commissioner Dales, who oversees special operations, and Deputy Commissioner Kelly, who oversees patrol, recently held a meeting with the DA's office around enforcement around a number of these different issues. And so that's something that the two of them are going to collaborate as to putting together a little bit more attention and some type of initiative to address that issue, as well as some of the other quality of life issues around ATVs and things of that nature, the street performance. They all kind of go hand in hand in terms of the increase in what we've seen around that activity. And so we're actively working now to get additional, again, resources, but also figuring out what we can do collectively from the enforcement piece that's actually going to be effective, not just doing, something that's not going to be effective.
Well, because it's going to get more, it couldn't be any more timelier with the weather getting better. I think it's just going to get worse and worse. And I think if we don't send a message early this spring, it's going to be out of control by the summer. So the quicker that group comes up with a plan, and if it requires legislation, we'll certainly, from the council standpoint, collaborate with council president to see what we can do from an ordinance standpoint if you need more teeth. But I guess we just can't wait any longer, because this problem was all last summer, and the last 3 weekends, my office has gotten hundreds of calls. So I beg for a quick team response to this. And thank you, Deputy Commissioner, for what you're doing. That's all, Council President.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, sir.
I believe we have Councilman Harity has some follow-up questions for round 2. Councilman Harity.
Hey,
Councilman, your Councilman.
This is actually
your
I'm
feed.
sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Better, yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm actually not feeling well. I'm at home, but just trying to suffer through this. But I liked what you said when you were running, I guess, one of the stations, you had one of your desk duty officers monitoring the camera and were able to make some convictions like that. I'd like to know, how many actual officers do we have right now on desk duty, and if it would be feasible to try to have them monitor some of these cameras like you had done in the past, because I know we have a large number of people that are either on desk duty or administrative or something like that, where maybe we can get some progress going with these cameras.
So our limited duty number fluctuates each day as people come back, but and as well as the number of people that we have. If folks are restricted or as a result of some type of internal investigation, we will not utilize those folks because, again, there may be some issue as to why they're already on the bench, so to speak, and we don't want to utilize them. But that is something that we're ensuring that the officers that are limited are doing a number of different things. But that is something that I'll be working with the Deputy of Patrol to, again, make sure that we're doing more of that if it's not being done in certain places, as to ensuring that it is being done moving forward. And again, like I said, those numbers of limited duty, we have a number of folks that are IOD, somewhere around 400 people that are in IOD status. Those people can return at any given time in a limited capacity. So that changes each day as to what we have available to us.
But is there a general number of how many people that are actually on desk duty that actually come in daily and are there?
I know
the other stuff varies.
I can get that number and get that back to you today. I'll get that number back to you.
Yeah, I'm just curious, and I actually thought that what you said was great. The fact that you utilized them to monitor those cameras, because like Ketzi, my colleague Ketzi Lozada said, we know our officers over here have a lot more things to do than just monitoring cameras. But if we had some more of those light duty officers would allow them to be productive also and feel more like they're contributing. So I thank you. And again, I thank you for everything you do. The 24th and 25th Police District have been very responsive to me, and I support them thoroughly. I just know that they're overwhelmed, and I'm just trying to get to how we can give you more resources in order for us to be able to combat these issues, because, you know, we get beat up everywhere we go about the crime problem. And, you know, quite frankly, we got a lot of senior citizens in my neighborhood that are afraid to go to the store and now have to take extra buses to get to a store because we have none. But, you know, it's just a little frustrating, and I appreciate everything you guys do. That's all I got, Council President.
Thank you, Councilman. We have no other members in the queue for these witnesses. Gentlemen, I want to thank you very much. Thank you for your service, and we look forward to continue through our budget process. I anticipate some additional resources for some aspects of what it is we discussed today. So we will talk to the finance director and the budget director about amendments to ensure that we get some additional resources on the proposed FY24 budget. Again, thank you. We really appreciate you being available. Thank you.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you to all members of Council for your commitment and your questions today. Appreciate you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. McDermott. Next up, we have.
Next witness is the Director of the Office of Homeless Services, Liz Hirsch.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Ms. Hirsch. Thank you for being here. Councilwoman Gilmore Richardson, I believe, had requested a callback. So you will be first up in the queue, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Thank you, Council President, and thank you, Liz, and to your team and to the Office of Homeless Services for your work. I apologize that I was not available the first round, but I wanted to come back for this round to just ask some questions that I have to help me further understand the operation of your department as we deliberate in this budget process. So I'll have a number of questions, but I'll start off with just some more general funding operations questions that I'd like to have responses to. And just forgive me because I'll be taking copious notes so that I have this information as we go through the process. So the Office of Homeless Services had $600,652 in Class 100 funds and $36 million or so in Class 200 funds in FY21 General Fund actual obligations. Your FY24 proposed budget is a little over $10 million in Class 100 funds and $67 million in Class 200 general funds. You all are requesting an additional 62 general fund budgeted positions from your FY23 filled numbers to your FY24 budgeted numbers. But in your testimony, it states that there is a 22% decline in overall homelessness over the last 5 years. But just in the last 2 years, we've increased your allocation from $2.6 million in funding for staff with an additional $30 million in contracting dollars. So what percentage decline have we seen in the last 2 years with that significant increase in funding?
Give me 1 minute to look at our point in time count.
Okay. And I want to be clear, I did receive the email that the administration sent regarding questions that Councilmember Gaudier had for your office, and I have not had the opportunity to fully review that because I did see information about the point in time count there because we just got that right before we got on this hearing.
Oh, okay, very good. And happy to follow up as well. In 2020, there were 5,634 people who were total counted as being homeless in our point in time count. And in 2022, it was 4,489.
Good morning, council member. This is Peter Curran. I am the Deputy for Finance at Homeless Services. I did want to address that jump in the Class 100 funding and positions from FY21 to 22 and 23. In our revised FY21 budget due to the pandemic, we moved a considerable amount of our general funded staff to the ESG CARES money, which was CARES, which was funded through the CARES Act that was rushed through at the end of FY20 by the federal government. So we basically just moved people that were employed at that time, so we did not have to have extended layoffs to this grant. So we really didn't increase, so to speak, our budget. It's just that those funds were restored in our FY22 budget.
Okay, so that was really just sort of moving folks around. Do you believe that the goals of your department has changed over that last 2 years since you've made those moves, particularly around servicing roughly the same amount of people? So when I'm looking at the budget books, that's the old school way to say it, but when I'm actually printing out these documents and looking at the numbers, and then I listen to what your testimony states as the goals, and particularly around where there's been a 22% decline over the last 5 years, but then you kind of see the money and the way it's moving. I'm just seeking understanding of, if we've seen this decline, how that has impacted what you all are requesting operation-wise, and why the money was moving in the way that it is. You understand my question?
I do, and thank you so much for that question. There's really two answers for your question. One is inflow. The number of people who are experiencing homelessness is not static. In FY22, we served nearly 18,000 people. There are people who entered our system in one way or another. And 70% of them were either unknown to our system at any previous date or unknown to us in the prior 2 years. So unfortunately, we have an economy that creates homelessness. So we still have new people entering. I think the other question is, what do we spend the money on? Our strategy since we started has been to focus on long-term housing. Shelters are necessary. They save lives. We can't let people be exposed to the elements. We can't let them starve to death. And so we have to have a shelter system. But long-term affordable housing, deeply affordable housing, and especially supportive housing, that's what ends homelessness. And so we have been investing significantly with your support in that long-term housing. And it has between a 90 and 96% success rate in preventing a return to homelessness. Therefore, we think it's a very good investment.
Excellent. So how many additional providers have you all been able to partner with the additional dollars that you've received? And what programs, and you just talked about long-term housing investments, but what programs have you all prioritized in the increase in spending that we sort of see in the budget books?
I'm so glad you asked me this question, Councilwoman. So one, we started a Street to Home program. We know that many people who are unsheltered won't come into shelter. They don't like the congregate setting. They don't like the curfew, the rules. They want the autonomy, but they're still homeless because they don't have the money. So our Street to Home has been a very effective housing first model. We have added what we call non-congregate shelter. These are units that are especially beautiful for older adults. We've seen a real graying of the homeless population. And that again, as you recall, during the pandemic, we had people in their 80s and 90s sleeping on the baggage belts in the airport. And they would come in if they had their very own room and their own TV with their own remote, but they wanted the care and comfort and safety of being in a community. And so we've added 5 non-congregate shelters, and they're temporary. They're all community-based. They're all new providers who are out there using what were otherwise empty buildings and just had a tremendous success rate. We've added shared housing. I talked a little bit about this in our original testimony a couple weeks ago, but one of the things that happens if you have a federal rent subsidy, like a housing choice voucher, you're not allowed to live with someone who's not related to you. So it means that people who are experiencing homelessness or who are experiencing poverty can't do things that the rest of us do, like choosing a roommate or choosing a partner that maybe you don't want to get married to, but who you want to live with. And so we have created and are expanding our shared housing program. We have a shallow rent program. What we find is that for people who are on very, very low fixed incomes from disability, which is about $800 a month, they can't pay the rent. But if we can provide them with services and pay $200, they pay $200 a rent, which is somewhat affordable, and we pay the rest, and we help that we can get them stabilized, and instead of cycling through shelter, they can stay in their own place. And we've had tremendous success with this with people, and it stops some of that shelter churn. So those are a number of the programs that we have invested in, and our Fidelity model Housing First. Philadelphia is fortunate to have the best Housing First program in the country. It was the first program to have a substance use disorder team. It's a very, very intensive program that helps people move directly from the street, people who have disabilities who are chronically homeless, into their apartment with very, very intensive wraparound services. And so the city has invested significantly in those Housing First programs as well.
Okay, excellent. And I'm taking notes for now, for each one of my questions. And
I would be happy to write it up for you.
Okay. And then in addition to that, if you could just detail which units have grown positions with the growth in your general fund appropriation.
Which units?
Which units under your department have grown in positions since your general fund appropriation has increased. And I'm particularly interested in the 5 new budgeted positions for the Office of the Director from FY23 filled.
Positions.
Are you able to reference what those positions are? Because I think when you mentioned that, and good afternoon, every council. I'm David Holloman, Chief of Staff for the Office of Homeless Services, and I welcome all of your questions here today. As Peter indicated earlier, when we first started in the pandemic, we had to move a significant amount of positions, including positions in the Office of Director, to the ESG grant just to maintain status. I think when you guys restored those significant dollars, those were positions that was already in place. I'm trying to get a better grasp of understanding when you said that we increased the Office of the Director position. As it's stated right now, as we are broken down, there's 5 executive level positions within the Office of the Director. There hasn't really been any significant expansion. And just to give you an overview of that, we have 5 executive level positions with 14 directors level positions, which are a combination of 75% civil service and others are MDO / contracted positions. Those are sort of maintained throughout the whole expansion. Where we have seen increase in positions here have been a direct relationship as federal grants that have been awarded to this office, where we had to bring in certain expertise to execute those grants.
Sorry, on mute. Okay, so I was actually pulling up the detail here on my computer. So I will circle back and get you the direct page where it's listed. Okay, but I have the detail here on my computer. Okay, just give me 1 second.
Sure.
let me circle back as to not waste time. But I will get the 5 specific positions, and it could be just that those positions were shifted because of the CARES funding. Okay. In addition to that, I wanted to move forward and talk about again the COVID funds that were received by your department. What is your deadline to spend those funds?
September 30th, 2023.
Okay. So this year.
They're mostly spent. We only
Okay.
have I think we have one program remaining. The federal government strongly incentivized spending those funds very aggressively, obviously, because it was the pandemic. So most of them were spent in the first year, and then the remainder largely in the second year. So I think we only have one, if I'm not mistaken, only one program that's left with those ESG CARES funds.
Okay. And then how did you all spend those dollars? And then with what's left, what are you going to spend those dollars on?
Well, primarily what we did in the first year, as Dave said, was we did pick up, I think it was 17 or 20 positions in that were qualified. Those funds were only available for outreach, shelter, intake, and rapid rehousing. So they were very restricted in what they could be used for. We did at that time take, I think, close to a $17 million cut in city general funds because we knew that we could pick up shelter operations using those dollars. So that was a big chunk of that 35 million that we got. The remainder we used to create those non-congregate shelter programs so that when we closed the COVID prevention hotels, we had these community-based settings to move people into. I think there's 112 of those rooms now that we're supporting. And then we added rapid rehousing. That's considered by the federal government to be a permanent housing program. So that was actually how we started the Street to Home program. We did add a number of new providers. We added, for example, at that time, Way Home, which was a partnership with William Way and self-incorporated that really we're not allowed to prioritize people who are in protected classes, but it did create access to people, LGBTQ people, for rapid rehousing through that partnership. So those were the main ways that we used that funding. We also created Help for the Hurdles, which was short-term childcare and transportation to help people get to the point where they, you can't get a job because it's cost too much, right, to get transportation and childcare. So it gave them a bridge to that. And we also funded vaccine ambassadors for about a year and a half, where people who were actually shelter residents became ambassadors with other shelter residents to try and help them overcome their fear to getting the COVID vaccine. And that was another program that was very successful and also got money into people's pockets.
Right. I was going to ask about the Help for Hurdles program specifically, and I'll circle back to that. I'm going to skip the questions that I have for the point in time count, particularly around parenting youth. I will submit those for you all to respond to, specifically because I haven't had an opportunity to review what you all sent back to us because we just got it at 9:51. So I will pass those questions and go to Help for Hurdles since you brought it up, because I do have a question about that program. Can you tell us which workforce development partners you all are working with? In your 2018 strategic plan, you note that connecting people in the homeless system to workforce development and employment opportunities is a strategic goal, and that you will establish a strategic partnership between homeless assistance and workforce development systems and identify opportunities to create new jobs targeted to the specific needs of the population experiencing homelessness. So if you could tell us which partners you're working with, and just give us you gave us a quick update on the program, but who is leading the implementation of this strategic initiative? And is there a specific workforce development strategic plan? And if you all are partnering with the Workforce Development Unit in Commerce on this work?
Yeah,
Yep. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, one of the key agencies that we partnered with was First Step Staffing, to identify individuals who were actually residing in our shelters to get them into entry-level jobs and other trade jobs. I really appreciate some of the programs that you guys champion with other departments, such as the street department with the tracking to get them into progressive here. First Step Staffing is sort of set up like that, but is not directly tied to any of the civil service union. What it does is really work with individuals who are sometimes chronically homeless or have been out of the workforce for a significant period of time to link them entry-level jobs. And then if they progress out, they're able to hire them to a full-time position with agencies that they work with. It is a nonprofit organization that was based out of Atlanta that has been in, I would say, a few major cities that have partnered with large organizations that have hired people in entry level and hired them to permanent employment. One of the things I do want to speak to, and I will really appreciate your line of questions here, the content of people that we see in our shelter system. One of the main demographics, and I thanks to Mitch Little in his office working earlier, the majority of people that are in our shelters are on SSI or below, which is about $806 a month. Fair market rents is about $1,300. So there's a lot of programs that we implement to try to use the best of our dollars, but there still just isn't enough there. One of the challenges that challenges and opportunity with the ESG grants were that we were able to partner with a number of nonprofit organizations to give people short-term subsidies to hopefully that they can springboard into permanent housing, but also working with like First Step Staffing for those people who do not have a disability that is able to work, that can maintain that. The issue that Liz indicated earlier is around that influx and inflow of people that are coming into our systems that are still below the extreme poverty line and trying to get into the system. Shelter beds, and again, I think what you're trying to get at is what are we doing for our return on investment on best dollars of the money? Those beds turn over anywhere between 4 to 6 times for one individual. Shelter is a system that has to be in place, with something that we don't want, but we know that it has to be in place because of the high significant poverty level of people that we're seeing that are coming into our systems.
Now, for my understanding, you said First Step Staffing.
Yes.
Do they have a location or office here in the city of Philadelphia?
Yeah, their main office right now is in the Kensington area, and I believe they're out of the Impact social service building. Yes.
Okay.
Pre-COVID,
And
they had an office in the Municipal Services Building, but it closed during COVID and has not yet reopened.
got it. Okay. And they are leading this effort for Help to Hurdles.
Yes.
Is that correct?
They are, and we are also working with same day pay, like one day at a time, and also with the CLIP program that have been extremely successful in getting individuals into mainstream employment.
Excellent. Okay. Now I'm going to move on to homelessness prevention and diversion services. You know that this issue is very important to me, particularly for the conversations that we've had previously. I will not sugarcoat that I do think that the intake process needs to change, particularly with the amount of funding that we have allocated to you all over the last several years, and in light of the testimony that you all have provided that states that you have seen a decrease of 22%. I have been around in the city long enough to remember Ridge Avenue Shelter. I mean, I go back, that far, okay? And my concern, my overarching concern, and the reason why I'm really delving into this in a real meticulous way is because I have an issue and take issue with the fact that there is only one place that parents with children, and particularly young children, can go to, particularly on the weekends, and that they can't ascertain and or assess if there's even space for them when they get there. If they're coming from one end of the city to the other, you can't really ascertain whether or not when you get there, you'll have a place to stay for the night, particularly in emergency situations. And you all know that I personally help constituents when they call our office phone Saturday night at 8 o'clock, and I just happened to be there and I picked up the phone, and could not ascertain how we could help this family who obviously, if they were calling my office on a Saturday night at 8 o'clock, they were in distress and they were probably calling a bunch of other places trying to get help. So I really am seeking full understanding of how all these millions of dollars are being thrown around, yet we have one place in the city of Philadelphia on the weekends for parents with children to go to. So my goal in this is to receive responses on the record with the questions that I have, but ultimately by the end of this budget process, to ensure that this model is changed, to ensure that we allocate enough money for you all to do the work necessary to open an additional location for intake for families with children. It is no way that you all have decreased homelessness by 22% and have had the increase you've had in millions of dollars in addition to the federal money and are not able to open a second location for parents with children, and particularly mothers with children who are in distress. So that, so you know, and I'm clear, is my goal for this budget cycle. I am not, and that's why I have to get this on the record, I am not going to vote for this budget as it has been presented. This budget will need to be changed significantly in order to address those concerns. I'm looking at all of this budget detail, and you know, a lot of this is the same, and I'm looking at all these different groups that are being paid, but I see nowhere where we have the opportunity to actually really help families who are in desperate need of these services. So I just want to be clear on that's what the end goal is for me here. Okay. So in your testimony and in the detail, you know, the study which states that every dollar we spend on prevention avoids $3 in shelter costs. Yet we are only spending $4.91 million in general fund appropriations on prevention, diversion, and intake. Your stated goal is to help 1,400 families with this allocation. Does this appropriation allow us to fully assist this many families and keep them housed?
Yes. But as you note, that is about 25% of the people who come to our front door seeking prevention.
Okay. All right. Considering the nearly 37,000 people who have applied for housing vouchers, and we're only servicing about 1,400 families with our current allocation, what do you estimate the amount of need is for these services to really be effective, and what would the cost be?
I think it's hard to give you an exact answer to that. One of the reasons why now is because a lot of the federal regulations as it relates to eviction has been lifted, and we're starting to see more people starting to show up various eviction points, even at our front door. So I think it's too early right now to give you an honest answer on how much it would be to allocate to that. When you mentioned that question about the $4.9 million, we would love to have more prevention dollars that we can support more people that may need a short-term subsidy that will prevent them from coming into shelter. So that answer to that, let me be very clear. Yes, we need more money because we're starting to see more families. Let me just speak about families in particular that are starting to show up at our front door. But as far as giving you an exact number, I think right now, because of a lot of the federal dollars, as not just Philadelphia, many other cities are starting to dry up. We're starting to see those direct effect as the evict moratorium has been lifted, where we're starting to see more people come to our front door. I think ask us a little bit later in the year. I think we can give you a better barometer of how many people we're seeing on a monthly basis that come to our front door, and seeing what the average cost of need per household that will benefit from prevention dollars.
Got you. Okay. Okay. Well, that is certainly helpful. I also wanted to note for the record that if you look at section 45 in the operating budget detail book 2, okay, on the very first page, you can sort of look at what I was referring to regarding the positions, because in the box at the bottom on the left-hand side breaks down the FY23 filled positions 11/21, and then FY24 budgeted positions, and it breaks it down general versus grant fund, and then the amount. So I just wanted to say that so you had that information.
Thank you.
Going back to that, can you all just detail how much you're spending just on intake? If you just had to aggregate and separate out intake, how much are you spending on just intake?
Does that include personnel also?
You can, yes, if you can aggregate it out, personnel, and then on the, the different classes.
Is there a way that can we get that back to you in writing? Because I think trying to separate that right now in terms of personnel and what dollars go from prevention, the various units that are implied there, I think that would be difficult to give you that exact answer right now.
Okay, well then, could you just give me an overall answer on how much you're spending intake, just like everything together without aggregating it out?
Yeah, Peter, do you have like an accurate, like a roundabout number?
I'll need a minute to gather that, but I should have something in a moment.
Okay, that'll be great. So while Peter is working on that, we can move on to my next question. If you could just detail the intake process for families with children for the record. Your 2022 annual report noted that almost 40% of the space in emergency shelters, safe havens, and transitional housing was dedicated to households with children. But there is no specific program objective focused on this population in your prevention and diversion goals section. What are you doing specifically to prevent homelessness for families with children?
That was an omission. I apologize. Families with children are the top priority for prevention, and the vast majority of prevention dollars are dedicated to families with children. Similarly, 45% of the emergency housing vouchers that we got have gone to families, and the first and now second tranches of neighborhood preservation initiative funding is all being dedicated to families, specifically renovating long vacant PHA units, mostly large units, to accommodate large families. In the first round, it was 9 houses and 39 beds. In the next round, it will be 15 houses, and I think they're all 5 and 6 bedrooms. So that has been our priority for families as well.
Okay, and then if you could speak specifically to, how you all work on the process for placement as far as emergency situations. If you could detail for the record, if a family with children needs shelter service on a Saturday at 8 o'clock, what happens?
Yeah, I think, and I appreciate the question, and I thank you for your advocacy with that family that you were able to call, and I apologize for what you experienced at that. So usually what happens is and I'm gonna break it down in 2 segments. During the daytime, we have Apple Tree Family Center, which is located at 1430, where if a family is experiencing an emergency situation, they're to come in there, they're meeting with a social worker. There's 3 basic questions that they're asking them. 1, is there a place that you can go to, another loved one, where you can be prevented or diverted from being in shelter? Because we know that's not always the long-term option. Secondly would be, is it safe? Are you in a situation where your life is in danger? Because I think that triggers a different response, whether that's fleeing domestic violence or not. And if their answer is no, then they're meeting with an intake social worker. That social worker is then looking within our entire system based on that assessment of need and placing that person in the best ability. One of our biggest challenge that we struggle with right now are large families. In some situations where we have providers that are able to accommodate maybe 2 children, we have families that are coming in with 4 or 5, and sometimes we have to make do. They'll maybe have like facilities that have bunk bed accommodations or a pack and play for a young child to stay in. Those are difficult situations. We'll be honest with you. We don't always have the exact answer. The issue is when it comes at night, and we know there's a lot of situations that occur at night. We have one intake site which families come to. We would love to partner with you. I think this is a different conversation about finding another after-hour intake site that can take families. But they are able to come down to that intake site. It's the same process during the day. What should happen is that they should still ask them 3 questions. The other next step, what should happen is that they should be calling around to all of the family sites to see if they could accommodate those individuals more times than not. And I would say about 85 to 90% of the times, most of our providers, they're fabulous. They work their butt off to try and place them.
They do.
There are situations in cases where they aren't able to place individuals, but unless that family is willing to go into a situation where we don't have room for 6, they may have room for 4, where 2 people may have to go in. That's an uncomfortable situation. It's a traumatic situation. We don't support or encourage that, but that's what we have to do to make sure that they're in a safe environment. But we would love to partner with you around figuring out additional options.
And I just want to be clear for the record that, typically that would never come to my attention, right? Because typically my staff would deal with that issue. But on that particular time, it did come to my attention. I don't know those individuals. I have no connection to them. They reached out to my office and I simply tried to handle the constituent case myself. And yes, I did speak with you all about it, and I appreciate everything you all have explained. But I think it's unacceptable in a city like Philadelphia, where we know we are experiencing poverty in a real way, that we only have one place. And they could not help that family because they couldn't even tell them whether or not they should come. How does that work?
Yeah, we agree with you.
I'm very disappointed in that process, and I am not comfortable. I'm just trying to be clear before I get to the last part of my questions. And I'll submit the rest of them for the record, of which I will need full responses, because this will help me to figure out what suggestions and recommendations that I'll put forth in this process. But we can't be in that space and place in a city like Philadelphia, where we only have one option that may not even be available. I'm a mother first, okay? And what I experienced, because they didn't know who I was when I called, and I'm glad I did not identify myself, tells me that other people are dealing with this and not having the best experience, no matter what anybody says. And I know because I called personally, okay? And I didn't call from the 686 number. I called from my cell phone. It's not acceptable, no matter what way you look at it. No matter what way we chop this up, is not acceptable. And yes, we do have to get a second place for families, because we shouldn't have to be in a place where we're allocating I'm looking at all this money. I have your budget detail pulled up on my computer. I'm looking at the way this money is moving around. I have a few more questions, but none of this is making sense to me. Can you explain how much you all spend on just the site that services families, just the site that is the intake for families? How much do you spend just on that site?
That will be, I have a total for intake in general, which is about 2.3 million. It will take me a little longer to drill down to just specifically the family intake.
Okay, so 2.3 million total for intake. How much is your department's entire budget?
In class 200, well, the entire budget overall for FY24 proposed is 78 million.
$78 million for the Office of Homeless Services.
Right, that includes,
And that
that's all
includes grants.
encompassing. That does
Right.
not, that's strictly city money. If we
Strictly
include
city.
grant funds, it's 127 million.
Okay, so $127 million, including grants and city. for Office of Homeless Services, 2.3 million for intake,
Yes.
right? Okay, great. So if I go back to the Homelessness Prevention and Diversion Services Unit, the vast majority of the funding in this unit is spent on staff. Can you detail, I'm sorry?
No, I said correct. So my
Okay.
apologies.
Okay. If you could just detail how city staff work with Philadelphians to avoid homelessness. And if you could generally explain how this office operates and the goals of each position. That's homelessness prevention and diversion services.
How we do homelessness prevention and diversion. Yeah. So there's two ways that people can enter. Well, actually 3 ways. One is they can come to our office, which is the most common way. They can also call and make an appointment and work with a social worker, and or they can go to one of the community-based organizations. Then they would meet with a social worker who would do an assessment, see if they are eligible for homelessness prevention, if we have funds available, and then work with them to get the documentation. Homelessness prevention and diversion takes a number of different forms. It might be mediation with a family member or a landlord to try and resolve the problem that's causing them to be displaced. It might take the form of paying a security deposit first and last month's rent, or it might take the form of paying back rent. In some small number of cases, depending on the funding source, it would be multi-month rent. This is dedicated almost exclusively to parents of children, usually young parents of children. The data that's available, the only research that really is available around the effectiveness of homelessness prevention shows that the closer the people who are to the shelter population, the more likely they are to become homeless if they don't get the assistance. Because everybody could use a little bit more money, and a lot of people who come to us, they could all use more money. And so we try to assess for that multi-month assistance, whether they're really the most vulnerable, what we would call imminently homeless. Council member, I did want to say make clear one thing that maybe I'm sure you're clear about it, but I wanted to also make sure. We do have between 13 and 15 family shelters. And we do have about 1,200 shelter beds. We just opened up another shelter in January because, as Dave said, we were seeing an uptick in family homelessness, as you have noted. And so we did open up another 60 beds, which did fill up right away, which is why we've been focusing on this long-term housing. The way the overnight intake system should have worked is that when a family comes to us, if there's no bed that we have at that one site, that they would go to and that they would be transported to another site.
And who would transport them?
Either outreach or the shelter providers.
Okay. No, and I appreciate that. And that I know about the shelter system and the shelters here because, I did constituent services for Blondell. And I think it would be helpful as they do come online that you just make sure you send it over to us so we get we just have an updated list. And our internal council team has updated the housing resources for us. So we have that as well. But just, keep us updated as each new potential site or system comes online so that we have that information. My concern more so than anything else, although I know the beds are very important, right? Before we can get them into long-term, is the intake part of the process. Because what people experience when they are seeking help in some of their most desperate moments will sort of determine how they're able to interface with the system moving forward. And so that's why I'm sort of focusing in on the intake part of the process, which again, I feel as though if I had that experience, there's no telling what's happening, with these families out there. If you could just talk about, pardon me?
No, I just think one thing before we move on from that. One, again, I thank you for doing that, for your advocacy around that. I think one of the things that we are immediately working on is to make sure that we have a written down process that all of the council can have for their constituent service. So when someone is seeking shelter, at least they have that information that one, the constituent service or any one of you have that information that you can share with them. The other thing I think we need to do is evaluate on our online services to make sure that people understand that in multiple language that is very simple and clear, that I like to use this term, and there's no offense to anyone, that my mother would understand who doesn't work in this field. So we need to make it very informative to people where they understand that. So I think as part of our response back to you guys, we want to make sure that we have a corrective action plan that lays out what a person should receive or information they should receive when they are seeking beds after traditional hours and during the regular hours.
Okay, that'll be great. And then particularly for homelessness prevention and diversion services, I'm particularly interested in that unit. Who leads that unit? Is there a deputy director for prevention, like the other units?
The homelessness prevention and diversion is under our housing services. The deputy is Roberta Cancelier. The person who is over homelessness prevention and diversion is Bruce Johnson. He was recently promoted because he also, in addition to overseeing that shelter access, he also oversees mobile assessors, who are people who go out in the community and do assessments of people who are homeless if they are unwilling to come into shelter, so they still have access to our services. So Bruce Johnson is the person.
Got it. You have one social services trainee in that department. Is that correct? Or only one budgeted?
Yeah, she's really the keeper of the numbers. Most of the, we have centralized put intake for shelter and homelessness prevention all together at our access points. We have 5 access points: Valley Youth House, Veterans Multi-Service Center, Apple Tree and Roosevelt Darby during the day, House of Passage, Station House, well now Michael Hinson Resource Center, and Red Shield overnight, plus outreach. And so so that it's mostly not a lot of the overnight is not OHS staff, it's contracted out. So that one person is really kind of the keeper of the numbers, more than anything else. Most of our services are contracted out.
Yeah,
so that's a lot of what you see, as you observed in the class 200 budget.
Right, because I'm seeing all of that. I'm seeing Valley House, RHD, but I'm seeing all the I have your detail pulled up on my screen. So I'm looking at all of these different providers, and then also seeking understanding on sort of what exactly their role is at which point in your process, because you know that under your department and then under the specific program, you'll have like permanent housing, and it sort of breaks it down, I think, a little bit differently than maybe how you all are actually currently structured. Maybe because of some of the grant funded positions. That's why I asked about the grant funded positions before. Go ahead. I'm sorry. David, you were trying to say something.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Can I clarify one thing too? I believe when you're saying prevention and diversion, so all of our social workers and social worker trainees at intake are cross-trained to do prevention and diversion at those intake sites. When they go to the RHD, the Mike Henson Center, those are a different form of work where we are contracted out in the class 200. So, but for the intakes, all of the social workers and social worker trainees are cross-trained. We actually made that push a couple years back to make sure that everyone who comes in, no matter who they see, are able to do the work of prevention and diversion staff. So they have that ability to do the assessment from A to Z.
Okay, that'll be fine. I am going to finish up. Again, I had already asked regarding the intake process for families, but specifically under emergency and temporary housing. Are there any specific program objectives relating to families with children. And if you could give us a breakdown of all the shelters that are available for families with children. And then finally, what it would take to open up a second weekend evening intake facility for families with children and potentially families with a large amount of children. That will be my last question. You don't have to answer it today, but if you could give us that in writing, and then I will submit the balance of my 6 additional pages of questions for responses so that I will have this information as we go through this budget process. Okay, so thank you very, very much. Thank you very much, Council President Clark. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Councilmember Gilmore Richardson, I just really want to thank you so much for your detailed analysis and your tough questions. And as Dave said, your advocacy. One of the most disheartening things during this current mayoral election is that only 3 candidates showed up to the mayoral candidate forum. And so the fact that you're asking tough questions, looking at all of this information and wanting answers, that just warms my heart. It fills us with joy. We will spend as much time as it takes to hear what you have to say, take into account your suggestions. I just really want to again and echo what Dave said about expressing gratitude. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, we have public testimony this afternoon, so we're gonna have to take a break. Give the stenographer and others time to prepare for that. So with that, we will take a recess. Thank you, Councilwoman. Take a recess until, let's say, around 1:40, 1:45. And to those that are listening, know we're scheduled at 1:30 for public testimony, but we're going to be a little delayed. We do need to give people a break to prepare for that. Thank you very much for your testimony. As we move through this process, there may be the need to have some additional callback. Thank you.
Thank you, CP.
You're welcome.